The air at Fort Rucker, Alabama, was thick enough to drink, a sticky mix of summer heat and the sweet smell of pine. For Staff Sergeant Anya Sharma, it was the smell of the challenge. Anya stood 5'5", with a wiry strength that often took people by surprise. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe regulation bun, and her eyes, the color of dark coffee, missed nothing. She was one of only a handful of women on the ground crew for the heavies, the massive helicopters that were the backbone of Army logistics. Her newest assignment was the biggest beast of them all, the Sikorsky S-64 air crane, a helicopter so strange and powerful it looked like a giant metal insect. The crews had nicknamed it the Incredible Hulk, and for good reason. It didn't carry people inside. Its job was to lift impossible things. Anya's first morning with the air crane crew started like many others in her career. She was the new face in a sea of familiar ones, the outsider in a club that wasn't keen on new members, especially not one like her. The team was led by Sergeant First Class Miller, a man with a chest full of ribbons and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was old Army, and in his world, women were clerks and nurses, not riggers for a 20,000-horsepower sky crane. He stood before the small group of soldiers, his arms crossed, his gaze sweeping over them before it landed, and stayed on Anya. "All right, listen up." Miller's voice was a low rumble, like gravel being churned. "We got a new body today, Staff Sergeant Sharma." He said her name as if it tasted bad. "She's coming to us for maintenance. Thinks she knows a thing or two about birds. But this ain't a Black Hawk, Sharma. This is the Hulk. It's raw power. It doesn't forgive mistakes. You drop a load, you're not just breaking equipment. You could be killing people." A few of the men snickered. Anya's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd heard speeches like this before. It was a test, a way to see if she'd break, if she'd complain. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She just stood taller, her gaze locked on his. "Your job is on the ground," Miller continued, pointing a thick finger at her. "You're a hookup specialist. You'll be directly under the bird when it comes in. It's loud, it's windy, and it's dangerous. You get scared, you get out of the way. You hesitate, you put the whole crew at risk. You understand me?" "Perfectly, Sergeant," Anya said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the humid air. Miller's eyes narrowed. He was expecting a flinch, a moment of doubt. He didn't get one. "Good," he grunted. "Don't touch anything unless you're told. Don't speak unless you're spoken to. Just try to keep up." With that, he turned his back on her and started detailing the day's training mission, lifting and moving a series of concrete containers, each weighing over 10 tons. The rest of the morning was a masterclass in isolation. When Anya approached the equipment shed, the other riggers would suddenly find urgent tasks on the other side of the hangar. Conversations would stop when she got close, then resume in whispers when she passed. It was a lonely, frustrating dance she knew all too well. They saw her as a token, a diversity hire pushed on them by a politically correct command. They didn't see the years of hard work, the nights spent studying engineering manuals, the grease under her fingernails that never quite washed away. They didn't see the fire in her belly, the unwavering belief that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Late in the morning, the Hulk was rolled out onto the tarmac. It was an awesome sight. The helicopter had no body, just a skeletal frame, a cockpit perched high in the front, and a powerful hoist in the middle. It was pure function, a machine built for one purpose, to lift. Anya did her walk around, her eyes tracing the thick steel cables, the massive hydraulic lines, the complex reading harnesses. She had studied the schematics for weeks, memorizing every bolt, every stress point. This machine was a marvel of engineering, and she felt a deep professional respect for it. "Hey, Sharma," a voice called out. It was one of Miller's corporals, a young man named Davis. "Sergeant Miller wants you to double-check the primary attachment slings. Said you better not screw it up." Anya nodded and walked over to the massive chain-like slings laid out on the ground. She began her inspection, her hands running over every link, checking for stress fractures or wear. It was a tedious job, but it was the most important one. The entire lift depended on the integrity of these slings. As she worked, she could feel their eyes on her. They were waiting for her to make a mistake, to prove them right. She was just finishing up when Miller strolled over, a smug look on his face. "Find anything, genius?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Anya stood up, wiping her hands on her fatigues. "The slings are good, Sergeant, but the safety clips on the secondary harness are worn. They need to be replaced." She pointed to a small metal clasp, showing him the worn-down edges. Miller squinted at the clip. it was a minor detail, one that most people would have missed. He grunted, annoyed that she had found a legitimate issue. "Fine, get it replaced," he snapped and walked away. He hadn't expected her to be so thorough. It was a small victory, but for Anya, it was a start. The sun was climbing higher, beating down on the concrete. The roar of engines began to fill the air. The pilots were in the cockpit, going through their pre-flight checks. Soon, the giant rotors of the Incredible Hulk would begin to turn. Soon, that beast would be hovering a few feet above her head, kicking up a hurricane of wind and noise. And it would be her job to walk into that storm and connect a 10-ton block of concrete to a thread dangling from the sky. Her heart wasn't pounding with fear, it was pounding with anticipation. She was ready. She would not fail. She would show them all what raw power really looked like. The sound started as a low whine, then grew into a deep, chest-thumping whump-pump-pump that seemed to vibrate right through the soles of Anya's boots. The 6 massive blades of the S-64 air crane began to spin, slowly at first, then faster and faster until they were just a shimmering, invisible disk above the skeletal frame. The Incredible Hulk was waking up. A wave of heat and dust washed over the tarmac as the twin-turbine engines spooled up to full power. Anya cinched her helmet tighter and pulled her goggles down over her eyes. This was the moment of truth. "All right, ground crew, you are hot." Miller's voice crackled through her headset, sharp and impatient. "Sharma, you're on the hook. Get ready." Anya gave a thumbs up she knew he could see from his position near the operations truck. She stood near the first concrete container, a gray block the size of a small car. Her job seemed simple. Take the massive hook dangling from the helicopter and attach it to the rating on the container. But in reality, it was a dangerous ballet. The helicopter, for all its power, was sensitive to the slightest change in wind or weight. The downdraft from the rotors was strong enough to knock a man off his feet. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and the whole operation could go sideways. The Hulk lifted off, its landing gear retracting with a hydraulic hiss. It hovered at 50 feet, a noisy, menacing giant hanging in the sky. Then it began to move slowly and deliberately, until it was positioned directly over Anya and the concrete block. The noise was deafening, a physical force that pressed in on her from all sides. The wind was a tornado, whipping at her uniform, trying to push her back. She planted her feet, leaning into the blast, her eyes fixed on the hook descending from the belly of the beast. "Easy now, easy," the pilot's calm voice said in her ear, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The hook, a piece of forged steel as big as her torso, swayed gently as it came down. It was her dance partner. She had to anticipate its movements, to meet it at just the right moment. This was where Miller expected her to fail. He thought the noise, the wind, the sheer overwhelming presence of the machine would make her panic. "What are you waiting for, Sharma?" "Hook it up," Miller barked over the radio. Anya ignored him. She wasn't listening to his impatience. She was listening to the rhythm of the machine, watching the subtle sway of the hook. She moved with a calm, practiced grace, grabbing the hook and guiding it toward the heavy steel ring on the container's rigging. Her muscles strained against the weight and the wind. For a moment, it felt like she was wrestling with the storm itself. With a final focused effort, she slipped the hook into place. It seated with a solid, satisfying clank. She then secured the safety latch, her movements quick and precise. She stepped back, gave 2 sharp tugs on the rope to signal the connection was secure, and then gave a clear thumbs up to the loadmaster, who was watching from a small bubble window on the helicopter. "Hook is secure," the loadmaster's voice confirmed. "Ground crew, clear the area." Anya jogged back to the designated safe zone, her heart hammering not with fear, but with exhilaration. She turned to watch as the slack in the cable disappeared. The Hulk's engines deepened their roar as they took the strain. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of protest from the concrete, the 10-ton block lifted smoothly off the ground. It rose into the air, a testament to the raw power of the machine and to the small, determined woman who had connected it. The helicopter carried its prize across the airfield and gently set it down in a marked-off square. The operation was a success. They repeated the process 2 more times, and each time, Anya performed her role flawlessly. She was in her element, a focused, efficient part of a powerful team. She could feel a subtle shift in the air. The whispers didn't stop, but they changed in tone. A few of the other crewmen gave her quiet nods of approval when Miller wasn't looking. She had met the storm and hadn't flinched. Miller, however, was not impressed. He saw her competence not as an asset, but as a challenge to his authority. After the 3rd lift, he strode over to her, his face a mask of irritation. "You think you're hot stuff, "Don't you, Sharma?" he said, his voice low so only she could hear over the idling engines. "That was basic training. Don't get cocky. The real world is a lot harder." "I'm just doing my job, Sergeant," Anya replied, her gaze steady. "Your job is to do what I say when I say it," he shot back. "On the next lift, I want you to double time it. Let's see how you handle some pressure." He was trying to rattle her, to make her rush and create a mistake he could pounce on. Anya knew it was a dangerous, unnecessary order. Rushing a hookup was how accidents happened. But refusing a direct order wasn't an option. "Roger, Sergeant," she said, her mind already calculating how to move faster without sacrificing safety. The Hulk returned for the final container of the day. This time, Miller's voice was a constant, nagging presence in her ear. "Move it, Sharma, move it. We don't have all day. Are you going to stand there looking at it, or are you going to hook it?" She blocked him out, focusing on the task. The wind seemed stronger this time, the hook swaying more erratically. She moved in, her body tense. Just as she reached for the hook, a sudden gust of wind pushed it sideways hard. It swung toward her like a giant pendulum. She reacted instantly, dropping and rolling out of the way. The massive hook smashed into the spot where she had been standing just a second before, taking a chunk out of the concrete. Anya's heart leaped into her throat. A cold sweat broke out on her back. That had been too close. "Sharma, what was that?" Miller screamed over the radio. "You almost bought it? I knew you couldn't handle it." But the pilot's voice cut in, calm and authoritative. "Hold on, Sergeant. That was a wind shear, not her fault. Good reaction, Staff Sergeant. You okay down there?" "I'm fine, sir," Anya breathed, getting back to her feet, her legs a little shaky. "All right, let's try this again. Nice and easy," the pilot said. This time, the hookup was smooth. As the Hulk flew away with the last container, Anya stood on the tarmac, her adrenaline slowly receding. She had been tested, not just by the machine, but by her superior. She had faced down the power of the helicopter and the prejudice of her sergeant, and she was still standing. But as she looked at Miller, who was glaring at her from across the field, she knew this was far from over. He wouldn't see her quick reaction as a sign of skill. He would see it as a lucky break, and he would be determined to prove that her luck was about to run out. The real test, she suspected, was still to come. 2 weeks later, the real test arrived, not on the manicured training grounds of Fort Rucker, but in the smoke-choked hills of northern Alabama. A wildfire sparked by a lightning strike in the middle of a drought had exploded overnight. It was devouring the Talladega National Forest and was now bearing down on the small town of Oak Haven, a quiet community nestled in a valley. The town's only bridge was threatened by the flames, cutting off the main escape route. The call came in at dawn. The Incredible Hulk was needed. Its mission was to airlift a team of elite firefighters and their heavy equipment, bulldozers and water tanks, to a ridge above the town to cut a fire break. The mood in the hangar was tense. This wasn't a drill. Lives were on the line. As the crew prepped the S-64, the smell of distant smoke already tainted the morning air. Anya worked with a quiet, intense focus, her movements economical and precise. She saw the same focus in the eyes of most of the crew. The usual banter was gone, replaced by a grim professionalism. The only one who seemed unchanged was Sergeant Miller. His arrogance seemed to have hardened into a kind of grim satisfaction. This was the real world he had talked about, and he was determined to be the one in charge. "Sharma," he barked as she was inspecting the cargo net that would carry the bulldozer. "You're on the hook again today. This isn't practice. People are counting on us not to screw up. That means you." "I understand, Sergeant," Anya said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "See that you do," he muttered, turning away to brief the rest of the team. The flight to the fire zone was tense. Anya sat in the transport helicopter that flew alongside the air crane, watching the massive machine cut through the hazy sky. Below them, the landscape grew increasingly grim. The green hills gave way to blackened, smoldering earth. A thick column of gray and orange smoke billowed on the horizon, a terrifying pillar marking the fire's front line. Oak Haven was just a cluster of rooftops huddled under that angry cloud. They landed in a hastily cleared staging area a few miles from the town. The heat was intense, and the air was thick with ash. The plan was to lift the bulldozer first, then a massive 2,000-gallon water bladder. The firefighters, a tough-looking crew known as the Hot Shots, were already there, their faces smudged with soot. They looked at the Hulk with a mixture of awe and hope. The air crane's rotors kicked up a blinding cloud of dust and ash as it hovered into position over the bulldozer. The noise of the engines battled with the distant, angry roar of the fire. It felt like the end of the world. "Ground crew, go," Miller ordered. Anya ran forward into the familiar chaos of the rotor wash. But this was different. The air was superheated, the winds unpredictable, swirling in strange eddies caused by the fire. She fought for every step, her eyes fixed on the hook. Miller was on the radio again, his voice tight with stress. "Come on, Sharma, let's go. That fire isn't waiting for you." She ignored his taunts, focusing on her training. She grabbed the hook and wrestled it into place on the bulldozer's custom-built lifting frame. The connection was good. She gave the signal and scrambled back. The Hulk took the strain and lifted the 10-ton machine into the air as if it were a child's toy. The first part of the mission was a success. Next came the water bladder. It was a huge, floppy bag, and hooking it up was trickier. It had no rigid frame, and the shifting weight of the water inside made it unstable. As the Hulk moved into position, a sudden violent gust of wind, a product of the fire's own weather system, slammed into the helicopter. The giant machine bucked in the air, and the hook began to swing wildly. "Whoa, hold it steady," the pilot yelled over the radio. Anya stood her ground, watching the hook, waiting for her moment. "Get in there, Sharma. What are you waiting for?" Miller yelled. His voice was strained, on the edge of panic. He was seeing his perfect operation unravel, and he was looking for someone to blame. "Negative, Sergeant, the hook is unstable," Anya said calmly, her eyes never leaving the target, waiting for the pilot to regain stable hover. "I gave you an order, Staff Sergeant. Hook that bladder now." Miller's voice was a furious scream. In his mind, her caution was cowardice. His pride, his reputation was on the line, and he made a fatal decision. He switched his radio to the command channel, bypassing the pilot. "Loadmaster, lower the hook. My ground crew is moving in." The loadmaster, hearing the authority in the sergeant's voice, complied. The hook began to descend again, even as the helicopter fought the turbulent air. It was a direct contradiction of safe procedure. Anya saw what was happening. Miller was overriding the pilot's judgment from the ground. It was insane. The hook was still swinging, a 200-pound wrecking ball. If she went in there now, she'd be crushed. But if she didn't, the bladder wouldn't get hooked up, and the firefighters wouldn't get their water. In that split second, Anya had to make a choice. She couldn't follow Miller's suicidal order. But she couldn't just stand there. She keyed her own mic, switching to the pilot's private channel. "Sir, this is Sharma. Sergeant Miller has ordered the hook down in unstable conditions. I cannot safely connect. Repeat, I cannot safely connect." "I know, Staff Sergeant." The pilot's voice came back, tight with anger. "I'm fighting it up here. Miller is out of line." The hook swung violently toward the water bladder, threatening to rupture it. If that happened, 2,000 gallons of precious water would be lost, and the mission would be a failure. Without thinking, Anya sprinted forward. She didn't go for the hook. She went for the bladder's heavy-duty guide ropes. Grabbing one, she dug her heels into the dirt and pulled with all her might, trying to drag the massive bag just a few feet to the side, out of the hook's destructive path. It was like trying to move a mountain. The muscles in her back and legs screamed in protest. For a heart-stopping moment, it didn't move. Then, slowly, it began to shift. She managed to pull it just far enough away that the swinging hook missed it by inches, burying itself in the dirt instead. Anya collapsed to her knees, her lungs burning, her body trembling with adrenaline. Above her, the pilot had finally stabilized the helicopter. "Hook is stable," he announced, his voice grim. Anya got to her feet, walked over to the now stationary hook, and connected it to the bladder. She gave the signal and walked back, her face a mask of cold fury. She had saved the mission, and possibly her own life, by disobeying a direct order. As the Hulk flew away with the life-saving water, she looked over at Miller. He was staring at her, his face pale. He knew she had defied him, and he knew she had been right. The battle on the ground was far from over. The fire break held. The water drops from the incredible Hulk gave the hotshots the edge they needed. By the next morning, the town of Okavin was safe, shrouded in smoke but untouched by the flames. The crew of the S-64 were hailed as heroes. But back at Fort Rucker, a different kind of fire was just beginning to smolder. Sergeant First Class Miller was not a man who tolerated being proven wrong, especially not by a woman he had openly disdained. He moved quickly, filing a formal report before the official debriefing even began. His story was a carefully constructed fiction. In Miller's version of events, Staff Sergeant Sharma had frozen under pressure. He claimed she had hesitated at a critical moment, endangering the mission. He painted his own reckless orders as necessary commands to motivate a timid soldier. He alleged that her panic had caused the near miss with the water bladder and that he had been forced to take decisive action to salvage the situation. He was a decorated senior NCO, and his word carried weight. Anya Sharma was a relatively new staff sergeant with no combat experience. On paper, it was no contest. Anya found out she was under investigation when 2 military police officers showed up at her barracks. They were polite but firm. She was to report to the base commander's office for a preliminary hearing. She was not to discuss the incident with any other members of the crew. Suddenly, she was an outcast again, but this time it was official. The quiet nods of respect she had earned were replaced by suspicious glances. Rumors were flying. The official story, Miller's story, was that the new woman had almost wrecked the mission. Sitting in the sterile waiting room outside the commander's office, Anya felt a cold knot of dread in her stomach. Everything she had worked for, her entire career, was on the line because of one man's fragile pride. She thought about her father, a retired Army engineer who had taught her to love machines and to respect the chain of command. He had always told her, "The truth has a way of making itself known, Anya. You just have to give it a voice." When she was finally called in, the room felt heavy with judgment. Colonel Davenport, the base commander, sat behind a large oak desk. He was a fair man, but he was also a man who believed in order and discipline. Beside him sat Miller, looking calm and confident, a stark contrast to the turmoil Anya felt inside. "Staff Sergeant Sharma," the colonel began, his voice neutral. "I have Sergeant First Class Miller's report on the Okehaven incident. He has raised some serious concerns about your performance. He states that you failed to follow direct order and that your hesitation nearly resulted in the loss of mission-critical equipment. How do you respond?" Anya took a deep breath, her father's words echoing in her mind. She stood straight, her hands clasped behind her back. "Sir, with all due respect to Sergeant Miller, his report is not accurate." Miller scoffed, a small dismissive sound. "Not accurate? I was there, Sharma. I saw you freeze." "No, Sergeant," Anya said, turning her gaze to him. Her voice was quiet but laced with steel. "You saw me exercise caution. You saw me follow proper procedure in an unstable and dangerous environment." She then recounted the events exactly as they had happened. She described the sudden wind shear, the pilot's struggle to maintain a stable hover, and the wild, unpredictable swinging of the hook. She explained that moving in to connect the hook at that moment would have been suicidal. "Sergeant Miller ordered me to connect the hook anyway, sir," she said, turning back to the colonel. "He then ordered the loadmaster to lower the hook against the pilot's judgment. That is what created the danger. I acted to prevent the hook from rupturing the water bladder." Colonel Davenport steepled his fingers, his eyes studying Anya intently. "Sergeant Miller, is this true? Did you order the hook lowered while the aircraft was unstable?" "The situation was deteriorating, sir," Miller said smoothly, never breaking eye contact with the colonel. "The fire was moving fast. I made a judgment call to accelerate the operation. Staff Sergeant Sharma was not in a position to question that call. Her job was to execute the order. It was her word against his. A classic case of he said, she said, and he was the senior NKO. Anya knew how this usually ended, but she wasn't finished. "Sir," she said, her voice firm, "there is a record. All headset communications are recorded, both on the command channel and the pilot's channel. I formally request that you pull the tapes from the Okehaven lift. You will hear the pilot state that the aircraft was unstable. You will hear me acknowledge that and state that I could not safely connect. And you will hear Sergeant Miller give a direct, reckless order that contradicted the pilot and endangered the crew and the mission." A stunned silence fell over the room. Miller's face went pale. In his haste to file his report and discredit her, he had forgotten about the radio logs. He had assumed no one would bother to check them, that a colonel would simply take the word of his trusted senior sergeant over a junior NKO. It was a fatal miscalculation. Colonel Davenport's expression hardened. He looked from Anya's determined face to Miller's suddenly panicked one. The confidence had evaporated from Miller's eyes, replaced by pure, undiluted fear. "Is there any reason I should not request those recordings, Sergeant Miller?" the colonel asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Miller opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just stared, trapped by his own lie. "I see," the colonel said, his voice cold. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Get me the full communications log from the S-64 mission to Okehaven, all channels. I want it on my desk within the hour." He then looked at Anya, and for the first time she saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You are dismissed for now, Staff Sergeant. Do not leave the base." Anya gave a crisp salute and walked out of the office, her head held high. The knot of dread in her stomach had been replaced by a fragile spark of hope. She had given the truth a voice. Now all she could do was wait and see if anyone was willing to listen. The battle was not yet won, but for the first time, she felt she was no longer fighting it alone. The hour Anya spent waiting felt longer than her entire career. She sat on her bunk, staring at the wall, replaying the hearing in her mind. She had placed her faith in the system, in the simple, unassailable power of the truth recorded on a magnetic tape. But systems were made of people, and people could be fallible. What if the tapes were lost? What if Miller had a friend in the communications office? Her mind raced with a dozen different ways this could still go wrong. Then there was a knock on her door. It was the same MP from before. "Staff Sergeant Sharma, the colonel wants to see you again." Her heart hammered against her ribs as she walked back across the base. This was it. She walked into the colonel's office to a very different scene. Miller was there, standing stiffly in front of the desk, but his arrogance was gone. He looked smaller, defeated. Two other senior NCOs stood near the door, their faces grim. The atmosphere was thick with a heavy final finality. A small digital audio player sat on the colonel's desk. Colonel Davenport looked up as Anya entered. He didn't ask her to sit. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the full weight of his command. "Staff Sergeant Sharma, I have reviewed the communication logs from the Oak Oven mission." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Your testimony was 100% accurate." Anya let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made her knees buckle washed over her. "The recordings clearly show that you acted with courage, professionalism, and outstanding judgment in a high-stress environment," the colonel continued. "You followed procedure, you prioritized the safety of the crew and the security of the mission, and you were right to question an unlawful and dangerous order." He then shifted his gaze to Miller, and his voice turned to ice. "Sergeant First Class Miller, on the other hand, you have not only been proven to have acted with gross negligence, but you have also been caught in a direct lie to a commanding officer and have filed a false report in a cowardly attempt to destroy the career of a subordinate. You have disgraced yourself, your rank, and this unit." Miller stared at the floor, his face ashen. He had nothing left to say. His lies had been stripped bare, and all that remained was his shame. "You are hereby relieved of your duties, effective immediately," the colonel said. "You will be formally reprimanded and reassigned. You are lucky you are not facing a full court-martial." He gestured to the two NCOs. "Escort him from my office." As Miller was led away, he didn't once look at Anya. He couldn't meet her eyes. He had tried to crush her, and in the end, he had only crushed himself. When they were gone, Colonel Davenport turned back to Anya. "Staff Sergeant," he said, his tone softening slightly. "What Sergeant Miller did was unacceptable. I want to personally apologize on behalf of this command. You did not deserve that." "Thank you, sir," Anya said, her voice thick with emotion. "You showed incredible strength, not just on the ground, but in this office," he went on. "It takes guts to stand up to a senior NKO and trust that the truth will prevail." He paused, then a small smile touched his lips. "I'm promoting you. Effective immediately. You've earned it. You will be taking over as the lead rigger for the air crane crew." Anya was stunned. "Sir, you've proven you have the skills, the judgment, and the integrity for leadership, Sergeant Sharma. The crew needs a leader they can trust. That's you." A week later, Sergeant Anya Sharma stood on the tarmac in the early morning light. Her crew was assembled before her. They were the same men who had whispered and snickered just a few weeks ago. Now they looked at her with a newfound, undeniable respect. There was no trace of mockery in their eyes. They had all heard the story, had all listened to the whispers of what really happened out by the fire. They knew she had saved the mission and had stood her ground against a bully. "All right, listen up," Anya said, her voice ringing with a confidence she had never felt before. It wasn't the borrowed authority of rank. It was the deep, solid confidence of someone who had been tested by fire and had not been burned. Her eyes swept over her team. "Today we're running lift drills. We're going to practice until it's second nature. We're going to be fast, we're going to be efficient, but most of all, we are going to be safe. We work as a team, we look out for each other, and we get the job done right." Any questions? The crew was silent. They simply looked at her, ready to work. Anya nodded. "Good, let's get to it." As she turned toward the hangar, the familiar whine of the Hulk's engines began to fill the air. The giant skeletal helicopter was being towed onto the field, its immense power dormant for now, waiting to be unleashed. Anya looked at the machine, her machine, and felt a profound connection to it. They had both been underestimated. They were both strange, powerful, and built for a purpose. The final satisfying twist wasn't about revenge. Anya had heard that Miller had been reassigned to a desk job, counting inventory in a warehouse. She took no pleasure in it. Her victory wasn't in his downfall, but in her own rise. It was in the quiet respect of her crew, the new stripes on her sleeve, and the deep, unshakable knowledge of her own worth. As the rotors of the Incredible Hulk began to spin, kicking up a familiar, powerful wind, Anya smiled. She pulled her goggles down, ready for the storm. She had faced the raw power of the machine and the ugliness of injustice, and she had conquered both. The Hulk was lifting off, climbing powerfully into the sky, and Anya Sharma, its new leader, was rising with it.